This is your friendly neighborhood atheist.
What up, Bryce Rarity?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Yourself?
I'm so happy. I'm so happy that your show is back and that I just get to watch it. But being a guest, that's like doubly, special.
Dude, I love having you on my channel. You're an intellectual dude.
Yeah, and I wore my tie-dye for the special occasion.
I know. I'm glad you did. We got literally is it the exact same shirt? No,
it's
close
a little bit different patterns, but similar.
Either way, we match, so that's cool. Now you're just missing the backwards hat, but your hair's too cool, so never mind. You don't need a backwards hat. So anything new and exciting with life before we dive into the debate that you want to talk about?
I wouldn't say new or exciting. I just I'm in my new place, and so I got my new setup here, and so it's still a work in progress, but it's mostly together now. So yeah, I'm ready to start getting back into interacting with people on different topics.
Yeah, the only new thing is I've had 2 job interviews. Both went really well, and I've landed a second interview with both of them. But the one, I'm trying not to get my hopes up because it is literally like the perfect job that I want and need, and meets all my expectations, exceeds expectations. So now I'm terrified. I'm and it's a 4-round interview process. So even if I can make it to 4, oh my God, how am I going to land this job? But we'll see. Yeah. So, okay, for those that don't know, this is my first official YouTube debate. It was my second technical debate. I hosted one on my Facebook. I was not well prepared for this. When you watch call-in shows for years and you see the atheists dunking on Christians and precepts, you kind of think it's pretty easy. It's I could do that. And I was not expecting this. For those that don't know, Joel Settecase is a big fan of Bruggencate and presuppositional apologetics. So not my area of expertise. I really should have been more prepared, but all I can do is look back at it as a learning experience and hope to move forward. Before we get started, Bryce, was there anything you wanted to say about presuppositional apologetics?
Yeah, it's I don't know what type of language you're okay with using here. I'll try to police myself.
Any language is fine.
To the best of my ability. It's bullshit is mostly what it is. It is it's a very dumb, silly, lazy form of getting around actually having to debate. It's I consider it the lowest form of apologetics, and it's really it's really, I mean, even most Christians don't go with it because they can see, you can intuitively, a person of, I would say, average intelligence can intuitively see the problems with this style. It's a very low IQ style of apologetics.
Oh, I don't want to go that far.
Well, it relies totally on circular reasoning. And so the entire form of apologetics is fallacious. And most of them will admit this. They're okay with that, which shows you their ability to reason. And, but we'll get into that later. I just think that, when I was a Christian, which I was for, I was about to say most of my life, but I'm getting pretty old now, so it's probably only half of my life at this point. But I was a Christian for at least half of my life. I would never have used these forms of apologetic. One, I didn't believe in most of what the apologetic arguments are. They depend on premises that are just not believable and not true. So I wouldn't have used that, and I certainly would have known that this is insufficient to convince someone who doesn't already believe. But
I would love to see you debate them.
Well, we'll get into here's to be perfectly honest, I'm okay with debating most Christians on most subjects. I don't debate presups at all.
Oh, okay.
Because it's a waste of time to me. To me, presuppositional apologetics is akin to verbal masturbation. It's not, you're not getting anywhere, you're not convincing anyone. The arguments aren't even designed to convince. The basic theme of a presuppositional apologist is to convince a dumb audience, not dumb, but an audience that's not maybe very savvy, that everyone already knows and believes in the thing that the presup is trying to argue for. Therefore, they don't have to make an argument. Okay. That's what presuppositional apologetics is. It's how to convince people who don't think too hard that they already believe everything that you say, so that you don't have to make an argument. That's what it is. That's why I consider it the lowest form, because they're not even trying.
They never even answer questions either. Really, they just respond to your questions with questions.
And I don't do that. That's another reason I don't debate them. I don't let people, if I ask a question, especially if it's a binary, if it's a yes or no question, I expect a yes or no answer. I'll allow an I don't know as a third option, but I don't answer questions with questions. Maybe I'll do it once or twice, but when I see that that's the entire methodology that my interlocutor is built on, then I'll just stop engaging and I won't engage with them. And I won't allow another question to go forward until they answer mine. You don't get to have a one-way conversation. This is debates are two-way, regular conversations are two-way. I ask questions, you answer, you ask questions, I answer. That's how that works. If you're just going to interrogate me, well, I can go to the police station and get interrogated, but the issue, if anyone's going to get interrogated, it's you. You're the believer. You have the burden of proof. I don't have to prove shit.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but anyway, that's my position on presups and why I don't debate them. But I'm happy to examine the propositional content of a presuppositional argument, because there won't be much and it'll be easy.
Please feel free to critique me as well, too.
Yeah, sure.
All right, let's do this. I'm going to get it started. Hope everyone enjoys. Leave any comments or questions in the comments section.
Do you mind if I drink occasionally?
I don't care.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, I got my bottle of water right next to me.
I have my bottle of water.
Bingo. We are live. And we already got a first comment. Thanks, Puck. Hey guys, Ethan Micheal here, your friendly neighborhood atheist. I'm super excited. I will be having a discussion today with Joel Settecase. Apologies. I am beyond nervous right now. This is our first time talking. I'm super excited. I've watched a couple of his videos. Definitely picked up some things, a few things I'd like to challenge you on. But I couldn't be more excited. And the point of this is for us to raise awareness on not just atheism, but showing that two people can have varying points of views and still have respectful and constructive dialogue.
These glasses are
so Joel Settecase is the founder and lead teacher of the Think Institute, former pastor, Joel partner,
and also to challenge the idea that it's possible to be good without God. And I would encourage our viewers to, while this is a friendly discussion, I would encourage our viewers to really listen for which of us is consistent with his own principles and worldview. For me, that's going to mean I need to remain consistent with what the Bible actually does teach, since I'm a biblically minded Christian. And for my discussion partner, that's going to mean being consistent with a worldview that claims to believe that God does not exist and all we are is matter in motion. All that exists is molecules and collocations of atoms and proteins. And I don't want to put any words in his mouth, so I'll let him articulate his own worldview. But look for consistency and look for arbitrariness and who which worldview can actually support.
I noticed right away, just really quick. I want everybody to keep track. He just said that it's his responsibility to be consistent with what the Bible actually teaches. And so I wrote that down. And so we'll see if he's doing that. I think that that's an impossible task. But we'll see, and then he tried to, he said that you need to be consistent with yours. And then he mentioned a bunch of things that he claimed was your position. I don't know if they are or not, but it looked like he tried to walk that back at the end. But this is something you got to look out for when you're debating, not just a presup, but any Christian apologist. If they're going to try to attack your worldview, make sure they don't assume what your worldview is, because usually they assume wrong.
That's fair.
Okay, sorry. Got it.
No, don't apologize. Interrupt anytime. I'm cringing listening to myself.
His can support its own conclusions based on its own principles. So hopefully that doesn't sound too combative at all, but
no, be as combative as you like. We're both friendly guys. We're doing this for not just fun, but to raise awareness.
Yeah.
A couple things. One is I want to be very clear. Atheism is not a claim saying there is no God. And I personally will not say there is no God. That would require me to support said claim with evidence, and I cannot prove to you God doesn't exist. So I am on the fence of I don't know, but I remain unconvinced at this point until evidence presents itself. So to be good requires God. I would obviously disagree with that. I think it is completely possible to be a good human being without God. For example, my freedom ends, like if I want to swing my fist, my freedom ends right before I hit your face. So I do my best to take a rational understanding of the consequences of my actions. And if I use, for example, well-being as a goal, if you and I can agree that getting your head chopped off kills you, you don't want to die, then we can both agree that we shouldn't chop your head off. And I think you can use that across the board for almost anything to get to at least where I stand morally.
So how would you deal with that? Just the initial claim, summarize your position of you can't be good without God. Like, what would be your first rebuttal to that? How would you handle it differently than I did?
Well, first, I would say I don't think that your response was bad. I recognize the Matt Dillahunty influence of everything that you said there, but that's fine because it doesn't matter where it comes from. What matters is if it makes sense, right? And it does. I would respond before we even got to that was the other thing that he said at the beginning that I was interested in. It's impossible to be good without God is a claim that he's going to try to defend. The first thing to do is to define what it means to be good. And I have a feeling that you guys are probably at a fundamental disagreement on this. I don't know what he's going to argue yet. However, if experience is any indicator, most Christians, including presups, will try to define good by their own presupposition, which is it is a quality that comes from God, which is begging the question, right? Mm-hmm. They don't care what you think good. You define good very clearly, I think, and sufficiently as consistent with well-being. That's one definition of good. There are others, but you defined it as that. There's no reason for him to accept that. And that definition is contradictory to what he's going to presuppose the meaning of good is. So right off the start, you guys probably are starting with two different conflicting definitions of good. So you're going to be talking past each other if it keeps going that way, possibly. So I always get them to define their terminology before we have a discussion about it. What do you mean by good? How do you define good? Right. Especially if it's a moral debate. If it's a moral debate, you have to define what morality is. What is good and how do you know?
Right.
Here's my definition of good, and this is why I use this definition. What is yours? So that's how I start those things.
Okay, cool.
But I do like that you defined atheism, or at least you defined it how you're using it, because sometimes
I thought that was important.
Yeah, sometimes they like to try to do a burden shift with what they think atheism means, and that's no good. So,
all right.
To be clear, though, atheism does not hold any view on morality or anything else.
Well, that's not really. I would push back on that.
How so?
What when you say atheism does not hold any view about, you said it doesn't hold any view on God, then you said it doesn't hold any view on morality.
No, it doesn't hold any view on the position of God does not exist. So it is not a claim that God does not exist. It is simply I'm unconvinced.
Well, atheism is the belief that God does. Atheism is a lack of belief in God. Yes,
a lack of belief.
Which a lack of belief in something is the corollary of that is a belief that it does not exist.
That's not correct. It's just simply I'm unconvinced.
So would you put yourself? Sorry, go ahead.
So for example, let's imagine we're in court right now. Mm-hmm. If you're not convinced the individual is guilty, does that mean you're convinced he's innocent?
If I'm not convinced, well, at that point, I wouldn't call myself an guiltiest. Right? I would say that I was agnostic about it. Would you call yourself agnostic?
I would consider myself an agnostic atheist.
You're going to have to. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so Gnostic referring to knowledge, atheism referring to the lack of. So I lack the belief, but I also am unconvinced that a God exists. But I'm not making a claim that there is no God.
I didn't explain. Agnostic is
sorry,
what
go
was
ahead,
it?
go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
No. I want to hear. So what claim are you making? What would be the claim that what do you believe?
In terms of what? Because that's a pretty large question.
In terms of God's existence, what do you believe about the proposition God exists?
I believe it's highly probable that he does not exist. However, I'm not going to outright say God does not exist, because to me that would be very dishonest. I can't.
So this is interesting because he did ask a good question. He said, "What do you mean by that?" When you said agnostic atheist, right? Totally fair. And then you delineated between agnosticism and atheism. Gnosticism slash agnosticism is addressing knowledge, claims to knowledge, and atheism and theism are addressing beliefs about whether a God exists, right? So they're not mutually exclusive. However, that is not consistent with the philosophical or the classical usage of both of those terms, And back in the day, if you go to the Stanford Academy of Philosophy or the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and look up these definitions, they will probably include what you just said, but the primary definition as used in a philosophy class, which is what these knuckleheads always appeal to.
All right, let's not insult them too hard.
Well, you may hear a few, and so I'll try. I don't know this individual, so I'm not speaking about him yet until I see his argument, but I'm just talking about in general. It's a knuckleheaded argument, presuppositional apologetics. And so are philosophical arguments for God. They're all silly, especially if a Christian is using them. But they do define agnosticism in a specific way as being unsure of the existence of a God or gods. Now, that's not how we're using it, but that's how it's used in those circles. And atheism is defined in those circles as the belief that God, meaning the only God we could possibly be talking about and the only God that could possibly exist, a Christian God, the belief that God, Yahweh, does not exist. That's what they define atheism to mean, so that they can do a shifting of the burden of proof. But he did ask you, what do you mean by that? And you explained it, I think. So that's totally fair. And the last thing to mention on that part is Christians like this are so self-absorbed in their own theology, they don't even consider the possibility of other gods. In order for the meaning of atheism to mean what they want it to mean, it would have to be the belief that no gods exist, not just your own God, right? I can believe that the Christian God doesn't exist. That would be an atheist according to his definition, but that doesn't say anything about all the other gods, the gods of Hinduism or Thor or, Odin or any of those gods, which he's an atheist on according to that same definition, So we're all atheists. It's just that I'm an atheist about one more God. All right, I'm rambling. Let's go ahead with your argument. I'm going to open my door, by the way. I can't hear you. But that could be me. Go ahead and play the video, and if it's me, I'll recycle.
And then turn around and say, well, God doesn't exist, but I don't need evidence to prove that. So that would be dishonest from my point.
So, okay, an agnostic would be someone who has exhausted their search about God, their search for God, and has basically given up the search. And saying, and essentially has come to the conclusion we can't know. Have you given up your search?
No, absolutely not. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this. This is one of the reasons, I want to go to church. Like, I scheduled my next 2 weeks for 2 different churches. I'm very excited. I am genuinely seeking the truth wherever it leads. If it leads to God, by all means, make me a believer, but I need that evidence to believe. Agnostics, I've never heard the term that agnostics have given up their search.
Well, there's a reason for that.
Is only a claim of knowledge. So
there's a reason for that. He just asserted that agnostics have given up their search because his definition of agnosticism would be what we would call strong agnosticism or hard agnosticism, which is
I've never heard that.
Yeah, I mean, there are subsets of agnosticism too, just like with atheism. There's strong atheism, weak atheism, positive atheism, negative atheism, etc. The same thing can be true with agnosticism. The agnosticism can be the position that gods are unknown, that we don't have any knowledge of any god. So you're agnostic, right? That's the broadest sense. But there's also a narrow sense of the word, or hard agnosticism, which is the belief that knowledge of gods is impossible or unknowable, right? There's a difference between unknown and unknowable. Saying that you don't know something is different from saying it's impossible for this to be known. Okay. So atheism has two usages. He's using the narrower usage, or assuming the narrower usage. He's saying agnosticism means it's impossible to know about God. So that's why he's saying these agnostics have given up their search, because their position is impossible to know, right? One, that ignores the other type of agnostics, and two, knowledge is irrelevant because you can still be a believer without knowledge, right? So just because, even if it was your position that it's not knowable, that doesn't mean you can't find reasons to believe. There are agnostic Christians.
Yeah, that's true. Not real common that I've seen, but yeah.
No, but I've heard people describe themselves that way, right? They don't know that God exists, but they believe it, and they have all kinds of reasons. But what would his position be? What would his answer be to someone who said that? What he just said does not fit that person. He just said agnostics have given up their search. Well, obviously an agnostic Christian hasn't. All right,
cool. Oh, by the way, someone in the comments said somebody tell Bryce his face forgot to age.
Who's talking in the comments? That must be theoretically or somebody I know, but
yeah, theoretically.
What's up, guy?
I don't know. That's all agnosticism refers to.
Okay, so an agnostic would be someone who doesn't think God can be known.
Correct.
Yeah. So
not necessarily.
That would be a positive statement.
That's the second definition of agnostic, but there's multiple definitions of agnostic, and I think most of them don't use that definition. Most of them say it's unknown.
Right.
He insists that it can only mean unknowable, right? But that's kind of a straw man of what you're doing. I don't like these debates of semantics where people are arguing about what words mean. It doesn't really matter what any of these words mean. The only thing that matters is what you mean when you say it. Right. You've already told him what you meant. So his position now should be to say, okay, this is his position. It doesn't matter. Like you both are getting caught up in this. What does this word mean? And having an argument about what the word means. It doesn't matter what the word means. It only matters what your position is. So when you say this is my position, and then he comes back with no, and agnostic means this, it doesn't matter. I don't care what you think agnostic means. I just told you what my position is,
Right. So
you can call my position whatever you want, but that's my position, right? You don't get to say my position is something else. All right. Sorry.
Don't apologize, man. Talk as much as you want.
To say I am an agnostic is the corollary of that. Another way of saying that would be saying I don't think God can be known, which is a positive knowledge claim. It's a knowledge claim about what can be known. It's an epistemological claim about knowledge.
So I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was saying, so it refers to nothing is known or cannot be known. It's not specifically say there is nothing known. So let's pull the definition. A person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God.
Yeah. So that's a positive belief. A person who believes that.
I would disagree, because it's not outright stating a person who believes it can never be known.
well, can you read it again?
Sure. A
Just wanna make
person who
sure-
believes that nothing is or can be known of the existence or nature of God.
So that's a positive claim that nothing is or can be known. No, I'm just.
Am I wrong here?
It depends on how you interpret that definition. So if you interpret the definition as two different clauses, in other words, I just pulled that definition up, but you got that from, you Googled it. I'm assuming it's taken from Merriam-Webster's, which is not the best dictionary, but it's the English proper one. It says the American proper one. It says an agnostic is a person who believes that the existence of God or a higher power is unknown or currently unknowable. So that's similar to the one that you used. That's what it just pulled up for me. The debate here is this, where it says or, right? If you interpret this to be a single clause, meaning the position is it's unknown and unknowable, he's interpreting the or as and is what he's doing. He's saying that the definition of agnostic is all inclusive in everything that you just read. I don't think it is. I think that the or is two different things. This first thing makes you an agnostic, or this other thing makes you an agnostic, right? So that's the difference between soft agnosticism and hard agnosticism, right? One is it's unknown. We don't know. I'm agnostic. The other is it's unknowable. Nobody can know. We're agnostic. But those are two different meanings. Either one can be agnostic.
Okay.
Either this one or that one. That was my interpretation of the definition. What he's doing is he's saying, no, it has to be all of that. You have to meet both of those criteria to be an agnostic. But again, this is all a waste of time because you've already told him that that's not what I believe. So now you're getting into, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? What should it mean? Like none of that matters, you know? So
I wish I would take this damn comment off the screen.
Going off the definition you just read.
Okay, going off that. See, because the second part of that is a person who claims neither faith nor disbelief in God. And I wouldn't consider that part a positive claim, would you?
Who claims neither? Well, it would be a positive claim that God has not revealed himself to me in such a way that is sufficient by my standards.
All right.
What?
So
it's still a positive claim. I mean, I lack belief in, flying unicorns, but I also believe that they don't exist. You know what I'm saying?
That's
okay.
Go ahead.
I would agree with.
This is silly because that's fine, but that would just mean that he's agnostic in the second sense, But there's other claims out there. Like the best example of this is we talked about Matt Dillahunty earlier. I think it was actually Tracy Harris that came up with this gumball analogy. That's really the best example to use because I don't think that's defeatable.
Oh yeah, the gumball analogy. I forgot about
the gumball analogy. Whenever someone is trying to quibble about what agnostic means, or insist, or atheism really, to insist that it must mean the positive claim. No, it doesn't. And that perfectly illustrates, for anybody who's watching who doesn't know what the gumball analogy is, if someone claims that the number of gumballs is even and you have no ability to count right away, do you say yes, or do you say you agree or disagree? If you say you disagree, it doesn't mean that you believe that the number of gumballs is odd, because that's equally unknowable. You just don't know, right? So you're not taking a position. That's not a positive belief. That's a lack of belief in both propositions. There's two propositions there. He's pretending that there's only one. If you don't believe the number is positive, the number's even, therefore you believe it's odd. No, those are two separate propositions.
God, I wish I would have remembered that because I knew
God
that
exists is one proposition. God does not exist is the second one. Each one of those has to be evaluated on their own. Those are two separate claims. You can reject both of them simultaneously.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that you're not. That would put you in the agnostic camp. But what he's going to say is, well, then you're not an atheist. You're just agnostic. I don't know if he's going to say that or not. But what a lot of Christians say is, well, then you're just agnostic because, you're not taking a position. But actually, in order to be a theist, because if you look up the definition of theist, what's the definition of theist?
I just the belief in a god or gods.
Yeah. So if you're not that, what are you? What's the definition of atheist?
Yeah,
it's multiple things, right? Including lack of that belief. So if you're not a theist, you're an atheist by default. You can be agnostic, you can be Gnostic, you can be hard atheist, you can be soft atheist, you can be all kinds of different kinds of atheists. The only thing you can't be is a theist, right? That's a binary. Either a God exists or it doesn't. You know, if you believe in one, you're a theist. If you don't, you're an atheist. That's the binary thing right there.
You know, I don't want to go too deep down this because this is another rabbit hole, but you know what always confuses me is when I meet an atheist who believes in the supernatural, like souls or heaven and stuff. Like, so you're not.
Why does it confuse you? Why does it confuse you?
Because it just seems like if I was to believe in souls, the logical next step would be those souls were created by a god.
That's only because you've been indoctrinated into a Christian culture and a Christian worldview, you know. But if you grew up in, what if you grew up in a voodoo practicing religion or Wiccan framework or some other kind of pagan belief system where they believe that everything living has a soul? That's not necessarily God centric, you know. That's just all life in the universe is soulish, and there's life after that, or reincarnation or something like that, you know. It doesn't necessarily entail that there's a supernatural being that's also an all-powerful creator just because there's a life after death or a soul. I think both beliefs are equally irrational and silly, but you can have one without the other, you know. You can, and the opposite is true too. You can believe in a God and no afterlife and no soul. You could just believe that the God is the soul and everything else is just physical material that he just snaps into and out of existence, and that's it. I don't know who believes that, but I'm just saying theoretically that would be possible. That's not logically incoherent.
Okay.
You completely, and that's the same position I would hold with God.
So the difficulty that you run up, and we should probably get to our subject, but the difficulty that you run up against is that, and hopefully we'll see this as we go, but the difficulty you're going to run into is the burden of proof is on you to show that you can know anything or have any kind of morality apart from God. Because,
see, this is the bait and switch.
And I haven't established that yet, so I hope to establish that in our.
So I predicted perfectly that he's going to try to shift the burden of proof on you, right? The only person who has a burden here is the theist, the person who needs to demonstrate a belief, because he has a belief. He has a belief in a God. He has a belief that morality comes from God. He has a belief that all reality can be grounded in God's existence. He has a whole bunch of beliefs on top of a whole bunch of other beliefs. So he has a lot of explaining to do. You started by saying, I'm not convinced. You have no. The only claim that you made that I can recall is saying that you can be good without God. But you defined goodness in such a way that allows for that. You said well-being, and that's objective, by the way. That's objectively demonstrable, which is the superiority of your moral system, which we may talk about later. He doesn't have any objectivity. He can't even demonstrate that the thing he's grounding morality in is real. He can only assert it. So he has to shift the burden of proof onto you.
He does that a lot throughout this entire thing.
Yeah.
In our discussion, but that's going to be my thesis, is that to be good and really even to know what goodness is, you're going to need God. You're going to actually scripture, and further, you're going to need Jesus Christ. So maybe we should dive into it.
Let's go right into it. All right. Would you like to start? Or feel free to go ahead.
Okay. Well, so when we're thinking about morality, I guess, maybe we should start with this question, because we're talking. I mean, it's embedded in the very title of our discussion. Can you be good without God? Maybe we could define what it means to be good.
There you go.
Would you like to share your definition of what it means to be good?
I guess good would be kind of, I guess we could say moral, but at the same standing, you and I are going to have different opinions on what's moral. So maybe we can say less harmful or not harmful. I guess I would define good as well-being. That's generally how I decide what is, I don't want to say what is best for somebody else, but I consider my own well-being and then apply it to said person.
So what do you mean by well-being?
Life is preferable to death. Health is preferable to sickness. Mental and physical well-being.
When you say preferable, if you're sorry to.
Okay, no, not at all. So would you, for this conversation, would you agree that life right now is preferable than us dying or being killed?
Am I glad that I'm not being killed right now? Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
So
of course.
Off of that well-being, we can obviously move forward and agree, okay, well, if we don't want to be killed, we don't want to kill anyone else.
Well, connect those dots for me, if you would.
Connect which? So, okay.
How do you go from your personal preference to what?
Okay. How could I have explained that better? Or, yeah, I guess how would you have tackled that?
Well, it's easy. First of all, he already agreed with you that he doesn't want to be killed. So you already share something in common, which the vast majority of the 8 billion people in the world also share in common. So we look for these commonalities in society. Most of us think that it's better to be alive than dead. Most of us think that it's better to be healthy than unhealthy, or, sickness or in pain or whatever. Most of us like pleasure more than pain, etc. And so we intuitively can know what well-being is. It's a little bit of a dishonest question, him asking, what do you mean by well-being? We know what well-being is because you agree with me. He is putting you on the hot seat, and I'm not going to beat on him too much because it's a legitimate question. When you say well-being, you should define that, right? He's going to pretend like he doesn't know what it means and kind of make you define it. But yeah, I think you did a pretty good job of defining what it is. With respect to prioritizing my own well-being over somebody else's, well, we live in a collectivist society. Humans are social beings, right? We have an innate sense of empathy because we're social beings. So part of morality conceptually means that, hey, if I don't want to be harmed, and I know that other people living around me don't want to be harmed, it's best that we agree not to harm each other because we want to live around each other, but we want to be safe, right? And so it's kind of a social contract. You agree not to harm people because you don't want them harmed. They agree not to harm you because they don't want to be harmed. And by the way, them being harmed, people who are close to you in your society harms you also. It's mutual. We depend on each other. So if we're harming people in our society who we depend on, we may not think it's harming us, but it actually is. It's going to harm you in some kind of way. Like, they just think of anyone who does harm in society. It probably doesn't go very well for them. Whether you're a murderer, rapist, serial killer, you harmed someone, what is the outcome of that on your life? The vast majority of the time, are they better off because of it? Are they retaliated against? Are they punished in some way? Does something happen to them? Usually, something bad happens to them. At the very least, they become isolated from society and are a pariah, right? Which is also bad for most people's well-being. So because we're all interconnected like this, it's not so hard. Our ability to have empathy allows us to know what is in other people's best interest is generally a shared best interest. So I would say that how do you separate, or how do you prioritize your well-being over someone else's? Well, I don't. We all live in the same society, and so my well-being depends on them being in a good position, and they depend on me. Unless you want to live off the grid, away from everybody else, just depending on yourself, that's a different story. Then morality is less important because you're not dealing with other people. Morality is only important when you're dealing with people you have some sort of social connection with.
Okay.
What you just said, we don't want to kill anyone else.
So if I don't want to die, if I don't want to be killed, wouldn't it make sense that I shouldn't kill somebody else?
To me as a Christian, or to you as an atheist? I think to me as a Christian, of course.
I think you're overcomplicating it. It's
how so?
Do you really? To me, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm trying to see the connection between your desire to stay alive and you putting an ethical requirement on others that they shouldn't kill. What's the connecting principle there? How do you get from the is of your preference to the ought of somebody else.
Hey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
You got a
Joel.
visitor.
Hey, Taco, can you go over there? I'm so sorry, buddy. Sorry. It's my nephew. Apologies. He's okay. So if we both if we want to evaluate what is best for one person. So let's say right now, if you don't want to be sick, if you don't want to get sick, would you want somebody else to get sick?
Well, okay, so you're asking a Christian that question. So
it shouldn't matter what you are. Do you want somebody else to be sick? Yes or no?
Well, wait, you said it shouldn't matter. That's a should. That's an ethical question. It should not matter. But we haven't established how you get to a should in the first place.
Well, pause it for a second.
So how do you start? How do you get to from?
So he doesn't want you asking these kinds of questions that are going to make him think. He obviously he's a Christian, but if someone's asking you a question, you know, he's evaluating your position, right? And so when you ask questions about people, he should be assuming an atheist framework. He shouldn't say, well, I'm a Christian, therefore we already know you're a Christian. That's not the question here. This is about being sick or not sick, right? The reason you're asking him the question is to illustrate for him, to kind of draw a scenario or make an analogy to the previous question he asked. He doesn't want you to ask this question because he doesn't want to answer it. So that's why he's going to say, well, we haven't established what should is yet. He's going to avoid every question that's meant to illustrate why your original statement made sense. His goal is it can't make sense. So if you ask me an analogy that's going to show it to make sense, I'm not even going to let you ask that question. I'm just going to say, you can't ask this question because you haven't established should. We're trying to figure out oughts. You know, it's a form of obfuscation. I don't know if he's doing it intentionally yet. I don't want to gauge him too early. I think he may be, but we'll see. You know, we'll see how often he does that. When you ask someone to explain their position and then they attempt to explain their position by doing an analogy, and you say, well, I'm not going to address your analogy because we need to define these words, then you don't really want the explanation. That's my suspicion.
Yeah, that's fair assessment.
How do you get from what is, I don't want to be killed, to what should be? That's what we're
already trying to explain that.
I'm trying to figure out how you connect the dots from your preference to an ethical requirement for everybody, or for me. Or for you.
I can't say what's best for everybody. I'm only going on my base understanding of the world. So, for example, if I personally don't want to die, I feel like I'm repeating myself now. If I personally don't want to die, if I don't want to be killed, I shouldn't do it to somebody else.
See, that's so David Hume, who was an Enlightenment thinker, famously debunked the idea that you can go from an is to an ought. Simply saying, I don't want to be killed is an art. You're sharing something that is true about your personal feeling, but you need a connecting principle. You need a principle to get you from what is your personal preference to what should be or what ought to be. And that's the very question that we're trying to discover. And as a Christian, I'll be happy to share how I get there.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear this.
Well, I think you should probably share yours first, since I want to make sure that
before he goes, he is correct about that. You can't derive an is from an ought. The thing that you weren't saying there was why you shouldn't kill other people. Like I understand why. I already know why, but he doesn't, because he needs the dots connected, right? The reason that you shouldn't kill other people because you don't want to be killed is because you live in and around a society with other people. And so if you are a killer, your chances of being killed go up exponentially. It's not safe for you to be a killer in a society of non-killers because you're probably going to be killed, or something else bad will happen to you.
So
in order to ensure that, pardon?
I should have drawn that line more clearly. Like,
yeah, and it's fine. That's a but you know, sometimes people need to be walked through step by step. Here's why it's bad for me to kill other people. If I kill someone, then there's nothing to stop anyone from killing me. And if we live in a society where everyone is allowed to kill everyone, then we're all unsafe, and we're probably all going to be suspicious and stay away from each other, and society is going to collapse, and it's going to be bad for everyone. Like you kind of have to like spell it out that way, like you would. I don't want to say like a child, but
I was just going to say, like I don't like to say, oh, it's common sense, because that is just a fallacy itself, but it feels like it should be common sense.
It should be, but again, common sense is not really a thing, right? Like what's common sense to me may not be common sense to you. So I never use common sense. But I just try to meet people on their level of sense. You know, he obviously doesn't have the same sense that you have. So you gotta draw that connection.
What? All right, here we go.
You don't have one unless it's just arbitrary. Is it just arbitrary?
I mean, I guess by your definition, it would be arbitrary.
No, but
what
is it by your definition? Is it arbitrary?
I wouldn't consider it. I mean, I think it's pretty. I feel like you might be overcomplicating this a little bit, because I feel like this is a very simple concept. You know, we can both generally agree that we don't want to do harm to somebody else, or we don't want harm to
that as a Christian. I'm trying to figure out why you, as an atheist, because you said, so maybe I'm a little confused, because you said atheism. I know when we spoke earlier, you said atheism doesn't make any positive claims about morality. I know you told Larry that before.
Correct. It has nothing to do with anything except the lack of belief in a God.
Right. So there are obviously going to be implications to that we should probably flesh out. If God doesn't exist, this is the discussion, right? Is what are the implications of God hypothetically not existing? And so you're telling me that you can go from your personal preference, I don't want to be killed. You can go from that to an ethical requirement that others should not kill others. But then you've also said that you don't know what's best for everyone. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do you go from that is to what ought to be, given your atheism?
Okay. Again, it's not from an atheistic worldview. It's just from my personal worldview.
Which is okay.
Which typically, yes, you would define it as secular humanism. But I mean, to me, it's not really a jump. I'm trying to process what you're saying here, and I must admit, I'm very nervous right now.
Oh, it's
my nerves. You're good.
Don't be. No, this is honestly, these are questions we all have.
Yeah, that's the gap in your explanation, the inability to say to get from this is bad for me, therefore it's bad for everyone else. What he's trying to get you to do is demonstrate why is murder bad for me, meaning that it's bad for everyone else, right? And so, yeah, just when someone else asks you that, this is it's actually really quite simplistic. We can see this in animal morality as well. You know, wolves are very scary and dangerous and threatening to sheep or deer or some other kind of prey animal, you know, right. but and possibly to other wolves from a different pack, right, if they have competing interests. But wolves within the same pack, they usually don't go around murdering each other. You know why? Because it's mutually beneficial for them to not murder each other. You know, again, they all depend on each other. If they all were murdering each other, the less wolves you have, the less successful they all are, and the greater chances that all of them die. That's a stripping down of human society. Obviously, human society is much more complex and larger than wolf society, but it's not fundamentally that much different. We are social beings. We're primates, which is another form of mammal that happens to be a social species. You know, we live in cities, we live in towns, we live in neighborhoods, we live in communities, right? We have interconnectedness where the more of us there are contributing to society in a positive way, the more it helps all of us, right? So it's not in our best interest to go around to allow for anyone to just murder anyone. That doesn't make sense. That's bad for everyone. Yeah. He's not getting that. I don't know if it's on purpose or he could just be getting hung up on you not saying that, right? So that's the thing to say the next time. The reason it's not good for me to murder is because I depend on everyone else, and murdering someone means that my chances of bad things happening to me go up.
I wish I could have thought of that.
To answer.
Oh, absolutely.
And you have to think critically about this, because if I wish I was eating French silk pie from Baker Square right now. Okay. I love it. I love it way too much. You can't, you put it in front of me, I'm going to eat it. But that does not entail that you ought to, eat French silk pie, correct?
Of course.
Right. And there's no connecting.
I would agree. That's French silk pie. That's not life and death.
But who cares? I'm going from a preference to an ought for others. So you've got to demonstrate how you've got to demonstrate a qualitative difference between my desire for French silk pie and your desire not to be killed, and how mine doesn't lead to an ethical requirement for everyone, but yours does. Why does my preference for pie not translate into something everyone should do, but your desire not to be killed does translate? See, as a Christian, I have a reason for that, but as a secular humanist, what's your reason?
I have.
God hasn't told you.
Too.
So what is it?
God.
Sorry, did you say something?
My reason is simply understanding the danger.
Pavel D already kind of said it's a terrible analogy, and he's correct. It is a dumb analogy. And the answer is eating pie is not a moral concern, whereas murder or whatever else we're talking about, like there are some issues that are just amoral, right? Eating pie doesn't harm anyone. It may harm you if you overeat, if you eat too much pie,
right.
Maybe it's harmful, but it doesn't harm anyone else, right? And you've already established that you're defining well-being, or you're defining morality in terms of well-being. So you can pick an example like eating pie, but that's an amoral issue. Me eating pie doesn't harm anyone, unless it's their pie and you're stealing it from them and they're going to starve. You have to add more, but you can't just you can't compare murder or punching someone in the face with eating pie. One is a moral issue because it deals with harm versus well-being, and eating pie doesn't. And just really quickly, somebody in the comments asked about how does that apply to Hitler? I think they're talking about the argument that I made about how, if you murder people, it's generally not good for you. And the argument is going to be Hitler murdered 6 million people, right? Plus, probably. But again, it didn't work out too well for Hitler in the end, right? Where's Hitler now? I mean,
well, some believe he's which country is he in right now? On the beach with a bunch of other Nazis. I forgot what the conspiracy theory is.
That's fine if they believe that, but the reality is there's a reason we use Hitler as the personification of evil. When we compare evil people to somebody, it's usually Hitler, right? Because he's what most people in the Western world think of the most evil person, right? And so you've got that, even if it's only that's a negative outcome for Hitler, assuming he was still alive. It didn't work out for him in the end, is the point. If you're evil and you do bad things to other people, it's not going to work out for you.
No.
Generally. So
of any negative actions I take. I don't want to hurt anybody. Like, I have no reason to do that.
Is that just personal preference?
You could say that's a personal preference. Yeah. I don't want to hurt anybody.
Totally. And that's great. I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that, but
I would hope so.
What if your personal preference changes and tomorrow you do want to hurt someone?
Then to me, I would be immoral.
But you wouldn't, because at that point your preference would be to hurt someone.
Okay, but if we put 10 people in a room right now, I would venture a guess that 90.
He's already changed your definition of morality. He's changed it from well-being to my preference. So again, you got to be careful. Yeah. He just said, you just said that if you changed and suddenly wanted to murder people, you would be immoral. And then he just said, no, you wouldn't, because it would just be your preference. That's a non sequitur, because that doesn't match your definition of morality that you already gave. You already defined moral as being consistent with well-being, not your preference. He needs morality to be your preference so that he can say it's just completely arbitrary and that there's no standard, and, to go along with his script. But you've already defined it as well-being. So if you define it as well-being, it doesn't matter what your preference is. You would still be immoral according to the definition of morality that you already agreed on.
Okay, yeah.
Well, you didn't agree on it, but you already stated that was your position.
Yeah, I should have went back to that. Not got hung up on the preference.
Percent of them would agree that you don't want to hurt somebody, or if you don't want to be hurt, you shouldn't hurt somebody else.
What if all 10 are abortion doctors?
Well, that's an abortion debate. That's something very different.
What if all 10 are Bolshevik revolutionaries in 1917 or Nazis in 1939?
Okay,
you see what I'm saying? We can't take a vote.
But here's the thing. Nazism
I don't get what
negatively
he's
impacts
making
other people. They're doing harm to others. So
Negatively by what
he keeps
standard?
he keeps doing what if all of them were Nazis? So what if all of them weren't? Then they would all be evil. Like, I don't get what point he thinks he's making by changing to, what if all of them were Captain Hook? Okay, well, they would all be evil. It doesn't matter what the what if is going to be. If they're doing the evil thing according to your definition, then they're evil. It doesn't matter how many people agree. It doesn't matter if it's personal preference. None of this matters. It still falls within the line of the definition of not good that you already gave. Right. I think what he's trying to say is that he's trying to make your definition be personal preference, and to say that there's no that means basically morality doesn't exist if it's all arbitrary and it's just personal preference. Mm-hmm. Now that doesn't work. The real problem for his argument is this doesn't work for Christianity. This is actually more devastating to Christianity than it is to secular humanism, but he's shifting that. He's saying that, no, you're saying it's arbitrary and it doesn't mean anything if it's arbitrary.
All right. See where it goes.
Does he ever get around to answering what his definition of morality is?
I don't remember. This was 6 years ago, unfortunately. I don't think so, but don't quote me on that.
It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't, because that's not in the script. That's problematic, because if you ask them that and they answer, then they have to admit right off the bat that they're defaulting to circular reasoning. They're appealing to something that they haven't demonstrated yet. They've only presupposed.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes, I'm sure you'd find one person that would say, hey, I want to be put in that. But the majority are going to agree, God or no God, they don't want to be tortured.
But that didn't seem to stop the Nazis. And what makes their preference any worse than yours?
Because they're actually doing harm against two people against their will.
So I'm sorry. I'm still confused. Have we established that doing harm to others is ethically wrong? Because right now you said that it's your preference. And obviously I agree that it's wrong because I believe that's what God commands. And I'm happy to.
The first question was, how do you define morality, or how do you define good? You said well-being. So now he's saying, have we established that well-being is, the equivalent of, or not doing harm, whatever he just said that was a few minutes ago? Yes, that has been established from the beginning. He wants it to be preference. He keeps going back to this preference thing. If you rewind a couple of seconds, I'll shut up to play through. But I just wanted to point that out to see how he needs your definition of good to be the thing that's in his script, not what you actually said it was.
Yeah, he's good at dancing and just pushing the burden back nonstop.
To share my view, but I'm still wondering, given your atheism, why do you say that it's wrong? You see, I'm still hung up on this because you said you don't like it, but we both agree that your preference could change tomorrow.
Yes, but I think, all right, I just feel like I'm repeating myself. But if you want to keep
on, that's okay.
No, I'll one more time. One, again, atheism has nothing to do. It literally only refers to my lack of belief. That's it. So me personally, and I would think the majority of people or anyone in the comments maybe chime in. Is there anyone in the comments that actually wants to be killed or wants to be harmed? I mean, to me, that's a simple question. You put 10 people in a room, you ask them, they're all unanimously, most likely, going to agree that doing harm is bad. So I feel like you're taking a very simple concept and you're blowing it up into something it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm most definitely not trying to blow it up and make it more complicated. I guess so. If I understand correctly, if we got 10 people in a room, your example of getting 10 people in a room and asking them, is your morality then pretty much? Would you say it's kind of democratically based? Like we go. So is it
based on populum? No.
Is it? Well, that's my question is. First, you were talking about your personal preference, how you don't want to be killed, and then using that, extrapolating that into a principle. But now you're saying, but if we should really do it by vote, we should ask 10 people.
No, that's not in all scenarios. So this will actually lead me into a question I was going to ask you. Okay. So on your stream, you had brought up slavery, and you had talked about how God it was. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to misquote you. So please, if I'm wrong, correct me.
Sure.
You said that God gave a list of examples or how to treat slaves. Now, to me, sorry, is that before I move forward? Is that correct? I don't want to mess up your wording.
In the Bible, slavery is regulated so that, for example, slavery is an institution that's been around since the dawn of man, pretty much, and slaves were usually treated pretty badly. In the Old Testament scriptures, though, you do have requirements that the slaves would be set free every 7 years, and they couldn't be abused, and they were treated, surprise, surprise, as human beings made in the image of God with dignity. And so, by the time you get to the New Testament, you've got even more. You've got even more historically unprecedented moral requirements for slave owners. You've also got moral requirements for slaves, and you've got
what he's trying to argue.
You've got encouragement to slaves that if they can gain their freedom, they ought to do so. And then you've also, astonishingly, you've got a logic in the New Testament.
Okay, real quick.
This argument is really dumb. It's like he shifted. I think it was your fault, actually. You brought up slavery and he ran with it. But this defense of slavery is so silly. First of all, most of what he just said is not true. I don't know if you know the Bible or not.
I don't know the Bible well at all.
Yeah, like if you're not really familiar with the Bible, someone can like rattle on a lot of those things and it can just slip by you. But if you actually know what the Bible says, you can see everything that he's saying is wrong. He talked about how slaves were to be set free. No, they weren't. He talked about slaves had to be treated with dignity as people. No, they didn't. Right. What he's talking about is in Exodus 21, the treatment of Hebrew servants, right? Male Hebrew servants, not the females, because they were sex slaves. They were men who sold their daughters to someone for money. Oh, God, and when the male goes out, the female does not go out as the male does, right? It literally says that. Those are the passages where it talks about how to beat your slave. If they survive a day or two, there's no punishment because the slave is your property, or the slave is your money, is what it says. So really contradicting everything. Right? Pardon?
You can beat them too with isn't there?
Exodus 21 verses 20 through 21 tell you how to beat them. If you beat your male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies as a result, the master is to be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, they are not to be punished because a slave is their money. So you can beat them as long as they don't die within a day or two. That's what it's ridiculous. But here's the real problem. Those are the Hebrews. It doesn't say anything like that for the foreign slaves. Foreign slaves and Hebrew slaves are two different things. Those were the slaves that were treated nicely. That was the nice kind of slavery, the kind where you could beat them and it was okay. You didn't get punished as long as they didn't die in 2 or 3 days. I'm sorry, 1 or 2 days. But the other kind of slavery, which is the foreign slavery, is the kind that happens in Leviticus 25, verses 44 through 46, where it says, your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may take slaves. You can also take some of the temporary residents living in your community, and they will be your property. You can pass them on to your children as an inheritance, and they will be your slaves for life. But your fellow Israelites, you must not rule over with ruthlessness. So it's making a direct contrast between the foreign slaves and the Hebrew slaves. The male Hebrew slaves you had to let go after 7 years. The foreign slaves were your slaves for life, and you could pass them on to your children as an inheritance. So there was no setting them free. The Hebrew slaves you could beat to within an inch of their life as long as they didn't die within 2 days. There's nothing said about the treatment of foreign slaves. The only thing it says is you must not treat your fellow Hebrews ruthlessly. The implication is you can treat these foreign people ruthlessly. You might even be able to beat them to death. It doesn't say you can, but it doesn't say you can't either, right? So
I didn't know there was a distinction there.
Yeah, and he didn't either. Or maybe he did and he's being dishonest, but I never attribute to malice what you can attribute to ignorance. He probably just doesn't know. He probably hasn't read the Bible either. I
guarantee he knows the Bible, but
he didn't know that.
Yeah,
he doesn't know Leviticus 25. If he thinks that you can let your slaves go after 7 years, he didn't read that.
Before we continue the video, I'm wondering if you could help me with this comment. So MC Chicago says, Joel is simply pointing out that Ethan still has not escaped Hume's guillotine because appealing to well-being still presupposes that well-being ought to matter. What's
not really. I mean, yes and no, but not really, because remember, the question was, what do you mean by good? What is your definition of good? You define good as well-being. So now we have a baseline for what ought be done. We ought to do well-being. Now, that part is the arbitrary part. We don't all have to agree that well-being is the goal. But once we agree that well-being is the goal, then we have our oughts in place, right? I think the question that they're asking is, why ought we promote well-being? Well, you don't have to. There's nothing obligating anyone to do that. Morality isn't about obligation. It's not about forcing anyone to be a certain way. It's not about saying anyone must adopt this, but it's very simple. If you don't, bad things are going to happen. If you're okay with bad things happening to you, then don't do it. If you're okay with potentially living in a society where you could be murdered at any given moment, go live in that society. We'll see how it worked out for you. Your society is probably going to go extinct. Mine will live on because we've adopted moral principles where we protect each other. And, we've agreed with this social contract. We're going to be good to each other because we want society to go on. If you don't care about that, that's fine. Those problems work themselves out. Societies, in order to thrive, they have ways of dealing with dissenters who want to do harm to society. If you want to do harm to society, we're going to get you out of the way.
Right.
We're going to banish you to a remote island. We're going to put you in a prison. We're going to execute you. We're going to do something to where you're not a problem anymore. But again, anyone who has those views where they're good with harm, that problem will work itself out. It may be ugly at first, but it'll work itself out.
Testament that naturally led to the abolition movement. It's only been Christian civilization that has ended slavery.
It was Christian civilization.
There's never been another civilization.
Christians were responsible for slaves in America.
Yeah. They always leave that part out. It was the Christian South that was fighting a war to keep slavery.
Right.
He's not totally wrong. He is partially correct. It was Christians in the North who said, no, I don't like slavery. But which position is consistent with the Bible? The Bible says you can do slavery. The Christians in the South used the Bible. In fact, they gave the Bible to their slaves. The reason why the majority of African Americans are Christian in the country is because it's cultural. It was handed down to them by the white colonizers that enslaved their ancestors. It was the only thing they were allowed to have, and it was the only time they were allowed to have where they weren't under the threat of the whip, was in church and the gospel. And their faith was really the only thing that kind of kept them going. So it's very deeply ingrained in African American culture. Jesus is Savior, because that's all they had. But that came from the white master. He talked about the New Testament. He said, the New Testament is even better. No, the New Testament's worse, because in the New Testament, slaves are supposed to obey their masters, even the cruel ones. Jesus didn't say anything about Jesus came with a bunch of claims that were mostly lies, but he didn't say anything about getting rid of slavery. And neither did Paul, by the way. Saying that if someone is a slave, they should make an attempt to escape. Okay, but you don't need to be told that as a slave. You know what needs to be said about slavery? Don't do slavery. Hey, masters, let all your slaves go. Neither one of them said that, right? So this notion that the New Testament kind of solves the problem of slavery, it doesn't. If anything, it makes it worse.
So there's another term that people use to try and justify slavery. Oh, indentured servitude.
Yeah.
I've seen people use that to try and justify.
Well,
slavery.
And to be fair, Exodus 21, the way that it talks about slavery is more akin to what we would call indentured servitude, because it's people paying off debts, selling themselves into slavery for a period of time so that they can work off their debt, so that they can get their freedom. it's fine if they want to call it indentured servitude, but there's still a distinction between that and the other kind of slavery that was the foreign slavery, where if this wasn't people selling themselves off, this was you buying people from other nations and then passing them on to your children as an inheritance. That's different. That's just slavery. And even indentured servitude, it's still immoral if you're allowed to beat them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you sign a contract with Amazon or with any company where your boss is allowed to beat you if you know and you can't quit your job until the contract is up? You have to stay there and they can beat you for, like no one would sign that contract.
Right.
You recognize that that's clearly immoral, right? So that's akin to indentured servitude. Just because calling it indentured servitude doesn't make it okay.
I agree.
That's done that. So the abolitionist movement was based in Christian principles, and that's that goes back to these Christian ideas that which we haven't, again, I sort of haven't laid out my case for why what I think about morality, but when I do, hopefully we'll see that it's consistent with the idea of treating people with dignity and ending slavery. Sorry, that was way more than you asked.
No. So I was thinking, you'll be able to lay your foundation. I was thinking, let me just follow up with my question.
Sure.
We can go through some of the comments, and then you can go into what you wanted to say about morality.
Sounds great.
So my issue right now is why. Okay, would you agree that slavery is immoral, whether from your standard?
Are we talking about human chattel slavery like existed in the United States and in the Western world?
Any type of slavery where you are, quote, owned by another human being. Do you think owning a human being is wrong?
So obviously this side of the Civil War, and knowing the horrific atrocities that the evil, I can say evil, atrocities of American and Western chattel slavery, and that would go for the slavery that took place in the Muslim.
Sorry, what's chattel slavery?
Chattel slavery is a redundant term for slavery. Chattel means property. Okay. So anytime you're owning something else, it is by definition property. So it's kind of a redundancy. It's okay. All slavery is chattel slavery.
Got it.
The reason they add that word is because they want to define slavery as indentured servitude as well, because they think that the Bible, and again, this is, to be fair, the Exodus 21, depending on what translation you're reading from, some of them say slavery, some of them say servant, some of them say bondsmen, bondsmaids. There's different words in biblical Hebrew that all kind of translate, it's a small language. So the Hebrew word has a wide semantic range. It means all of those things. And so they like to be clear to give a distinction. I'm against chattel slavery, which is slavery, but I'm okay with this other kind of slavery, which is not really slavery, it's servitude. So that's the reason why they're doing that.
Okay, thank you.
The world, in Africa, in China, the incredible degradation that's going on even over there now in sweatshops. Yeah, I 100% condemn that based on biblical principles. Where I would be cautious of painting with a broad brush is when you have situations like situations that would happen quite frequently in the ancient world, for example, where a woman, let's say her husband dies, and in that society, being a single mom, for example, was pretty much a death sentence. And so what she would do is, let's say she would go to a wealthy family and say, hey, I will work for you. You give me room and board. I'll pledge my allegiance to you. You treat me good. And we'll call it fair and square. And then I'll be protected from marauders, rapists, abusers, and the worst elements of society.
That's terrible, though. You don't find that terrible that someone is so in fear for their life that they have to go and essentially be someone's slave?
Are you saying you put her out on the street?
I'm not saying I'd put her on the street, but being made a slave is a terrible thing. Like, to me, at some point, whether it be in the Bible, God should have just come down and said, like, why didn't he say, hey, slavery is wrong?
Are you, I'm sorry.
He always asks.
You said it's a terrible thing, but based on what? From your worldview?
From my standards of how to treat other human beings.
But we're talking about your moral feelings.
Well, yeah. We'll pause it for a second.
So, okay.
So what?
So he's trying to pretend that that's not terrible. I think if you go back, I think you asked him, "Isn't that terrible?"
Yeah.
Did he answer? I don't think he answered. He just shifted it back to, well, why would you think it's terrible from your point of view? But that's not the question. The question is, do you think it's terrible?
Right.
You know, so that's when they try to do that. Don't play that game. He's like, I think it's terrible. I can tell you why, but first you answer my question. Do you think it's terrible?
Yeah.
Because if you don't think it's terrible, that's the bigger problem. That's the bigger divide we're having, right?
Yeah, I unfortunately I let him like just push too much and not answer questions, and I should have pushed back harder.
The problem is he doesn't think it's terrible. He thinks it's good because the Bible, that's the path that the Bible laid out for these poor women. You know, if the Bible says it, it's good. So no, having women be slaves, why would that be bad? You can explain why that would be bad in your worldview as an atheist. It's only bad in your worldview as a secular humanist. Christianity can't account for slavery being bad. That's the problem. So that's why he's pretending that only my worldview can account for why slavery is bad. It can't at all. Your worldview, well, I can't say about his worldview, but the Bible definitely endorses slavery. So you can't use the Bible as your metric for why slavery is wrong. But we can use secular humanism, you know. But so when you asked him, isn't that bad? He didn't want to say no because he looks like a fool and an evil person if he says no, you know, but it's his true position. If he's being logically consistent, that's his position. You have to agree that this form of slavery, at least, is good because the Bible says that it's okay. There's no condemnation against it. That was the standard. God didn't have any laws outlawing it. You know, this is the failure of that, that whole, well, God had to make these rules that way because society was so bad. Everyone was practicing slavery back there, so God had to regulate it. No, that doesn't work. God doesn't have to lower his standard to the standard of man. If God is all powerful and all good, all knowing, if he has the omni attributes, why would he have to lower his standard to the standards of society at the time? Why would he have to bend and allow for these immoral things that make it slightly less bad? Why wouldn't he just outlaw the immoral things? He can't say that slavery is immoral is the problem because the Bible doesn't say it's immoral.
No, it's not. You can do it. And I should have pushed on that.
Yeah.
Do you think slavery is wrong?
So I think I just explained that.
Right.
Let's say 99 times out of 100, unless it's to somehow preserve the well-being of somebody. Yeah, but I believe that it's wrong because God made us in his image.
That's fine. But we both agree that slavery is wrong.
It's not biblical.
I don't know that you've established that. I mean, maybe your moral feelings would say so, sure. But given the scenario that I just said.
So really quick, Ethan, I'm sorry to pause it again.
I mean, how would you
pause at any point?
This is something this is my strategy. I don't know. I'm not saying you have to do this, but if you plan on doing this in the future with any apologist, not just a Presup, and you're kind of getting hung up on is slavery bad? They want to make you justify why it's bad under your worldview. He just said he thinks it's bad because we were made in God's image, right? But the Bible doesn't say it's bad though. See, his position is not biblical. And if you're going to be a Bible believing Christian, remember at the start of the conversation, he said his goal was to be consistent with what the Bible actually teaches.
He did say that, yes.
The Bible doesn't teach that slavery is wrong. The Bible teaches that it's an amoral position at the minimum. But when God gives commands allowing it to be done, and then he commands that other people be enslaved, we haven't gotten to those verses yet. You can't say it's wrong. You can't say it's wrong biblically. You can disagree with it as a Christian, but you can't say it's wrong biblically. And if it's not wrong biblically, your disagreement as a Christian is not following what the Bible actually teaches. Being made in God's image has nothing to do with whether slavery is right or wrong. And as a matter of fact, that makes it worse because the Christian position is that we're all slaves to God. God is pro-slavery, right? We're all God's slaves. We're equivocating over what slavery means, but there's nothing in the Bible that says slavery is wrong. So his position is already not biblical. What I would do is just hold them to that. Didn't you say at the beginning of the conversation you were holding to what is biblically consistent? Because I don't see how that's biblically consistent. That's what I would have done instead of letting him turn it back on you. Well, how do you justify that from your position? No. You said you were trying to be biblically consistent. The Bible says you can do slavery. So why are you against it? What's wrong with it? Show me in the Bible where it says slavery is wrong. He can't.
God, I wish I would have done that.
All right, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah,
What
I know
do
I
you
keep
do
saying
to
sorry, but I'm
a single
I'm not.
mom.
Don't say sorry.
Sorry,
Just
not
give
sorry.
me shelter and food, and I'll work for you.
I would do my best to, of course, help her, but I wouldn't make her a slave. I think that no form of slavery, in my opinion, even indentured servitude, it's morally wrong. Like, we're human beings. We're not supposed to be slaves. Like, that's, to me, that's a
We're
simple
not supposed to
concept.
be, though. But I mean, so you're speaking right now like you believe we're made in the image of God and that we have inherent.
No, I'm not.
Well, no, you are. That's what you're talking about. Is you're speaking about human beings as if they have inherent dignity and worth and value.
Yeah, I believe we do have value.
I don't.
But that has nothing to do with God.
You don't believe we have value?
I believe some people have value. I don't believe everybody inherently has value. There's no inherent value to anything. Value is something that has to be applied by thinking minds. Value is a concept of the mind. It doesn't really exist. It's like this nebulous abstract thing, right? What is the value of the planet Neptune?
I don't know.
Does the universe care if Neptune exists or not?
What was that?
Does the universe care if Neptune exists or not?
No, not at all.
Yeah, it only has value when we place value on it. And the same thing is true with our fellow human beings, right? I value you because I know you and you're my friend. I wouldn't value someone like Adolf Hitler. I'm glad he's dead, right? He has no value. So this notion that all human beings have inherent value, even he doesn't believe that. Let me take that back. A Bible believing Christian can't believe that. How much he believes in the Bible, I don't know, because he's already diverted from it. But if you're a Bible believing Christian, you can't believe that everyone has value, because wide is the road to destruction and many people find it, but narrow is the gate to salvation and only few find it. That's in the book of Mathew 7. So, clearly most people end up. What's that?
I said, and you say your memory sucks. You're pulling out Bible verses.
I mean, I know the verses that I've read multiple times and that, have a meaning that I'm trying to get to. But most, if hell exists and is a real thing, ask him, do the people in hell have value? I know this is post facto, right? This is way after the fact.
But that would have been a good question to ask.
If you come across this in the future, ask a Christian who thinks that we all have value. Ask him if the people in hell have value, and then ask them what that value is. Now you can think that you, as an atheist, I'm fine with you thinking that everyone has value. I just disagree with you, because I'll tell you why I value some people and I don't value others. But
yeah, I would agree with you on the value then.
Go on.
No, that's it. I mean, to me, it doesn't have anything to do with God. Like, I don't get my feelings from God.
Is that an arbitrary feeling?
I guess technically, if you want to say it is, yeah.
Well then,
but I mean,
honestly, so what?
Okay. Why do you say so what?
Well, why should anyone? Okay, hear me. And I'm not saying this to be harsh, because I have all the respect for you in the world.
We're good, man. We're good.
Okay. Why would anyone care? We're talking about
what's red herring?
What he just did right there. First, you talked about, do people have inherent value? You said yes. He said, is that arbitrary? And by the way, the answer is yes, it is arbitrary. That's your if that's true, maybe it's not, but that's what you said. You said people have inherent value. He's asking you, is that arbitrary? It is, because obviously everyone doesn't agree with you, right? So then he responds with, so what? So what? That that all applied value is arbitrary. That's not a problem. Like, saying so what is just to try to say it actually doesn't have value. No one really has value in your worldview. If value is only arbitrary, then it doesn't exist. Well, no, that's bullshit. Value is arbitrary, and it only exists in an arbitrary way. Things don't have inherent value. They only have value that we give it. and we give things different value. Have you ever heard the expression sentimental value?
Yeah.
Just because something can have value to you and have no value to me, but it's sentimental value, right? But if you walked into someone's house and you asked them, boy, that's an interesting vase. Is that worth a lot? And then they say, no, but this is my grandmother gave this to me and she passed away. It was the one thing I have remember. It has sentimental value for her, right? Would you respond with, so what?
No.
That's so dumb, right? Like that's the end of that line of reasoning. It has value because I apply value to it. The end. There's no so what. You don't have to care. You don't have to. Maybe it doesn't have to have value for you, but that's how I apply value. That's it.
All right.
Can you be good without God? We're not talking about, do I like chocolate or vanilla ice cream?
Absolutely.
So who cares? Who cares what your preference is? If tomorrow you change your mind and you say, you know what? Actually, I think I want to go enslave me a bunch of people. I could condemn that as wrong because the Bible condemns man stealing, kidnapping, and
but it doesn't condemn slavery.
The Bible does absolutely condemn the kind of slavery that took place in the Western world, in Africa, and in the Roman world.
At what point?
Every time he says something that's biblically wrong, I'm going to correct it. The Bible, when he just said the Bible condemns man stealing, it does, but it's taken out of context because he's quoting Exodus 21 verse 16. But that, again, that applies to Hebrew slaves. It is against God's commandment to kidnap your fellow Israelite because those are free citizens. You can't do that. However, you're directed to kidnap people of the foreign nations, especially when you invade a country and they don't bow down to your will. You're supposed to kill all of the men and boys and young women who have never slept with a man. Then you can take as slaves. Those young girls you can take as slaves, right? And so this idea that you're not supposed to man steal, that only applies to the Hebrews. The context of Exodus 21 is Hebrew slaves. In fact, the context of the entire chapter, the entire book of Exodus really is the Hebrews, Mm-hmm. That's not a statement about slavery at all. And it's certainly, even the verse, even in the context of Hebrew slavery, it doesn't condemn slavery. It only condemns kidnapping people to be slaves. Well, if somebody sells themselves to you to be your slave, well, then you can still do slavery. It says that in the beginning, so.
God, I wish I had more biblical knowledge.
At what point did the Bible, God, or Jesus specifically condemn slavery and say, do not own slaves? It's wrong in all scenarios.
In the Old Covenant, there's a prohibition against man stealing. You may not kidnap a person, which is exactly how American and Western chattel slavery happened.
No, it isn't.
One tribe would conquer another tribe. They'd kidnap.
Okay, that last part he just said is true, but we don't know the Europeans that got slaves. They didn't kidnap them from Africa. How did Europeans get slaves? I'm testing.
I actually don't know.
They bought them. The slaves were purchased from West Africa to the tribes and the kingdoms that had slaves. They said, hey, we have slaves. You want slaves? Buy them from us. And that's how they got them. They weren't stolen. At least there's no evidence. Now, some of them may have been stolen by the African kingdoms, but probably more likely in the majority of the cases, they were prisoners of war. They were people who were conquered. They were people who were indebted, indentured servitude, that type of slavery. They did that in all throughout Africa and a lot of places in the world. And so when these Africans were selling these slaves, they probably didn't know that it would be chattel slavery, right? And at least not to the extent that they were going to be treated, that they were going to make a whole nation of them. But the majority of slaves in the Americas weren't stolen. Their ancestors were purchased, and then over the next several hundred years, everyone else was just born into slavery. There's nothing in the Bible against that.
So do you think, and I know it's speculation, do you think he's being dishonest or not biblically accurate?
I think he's just a bit ignorant on what the Bible says. I think he read a couple of, Bible passages that kind of work with him. And this is common in Christianity. Most Christians don't read their Bible. And, If they do, they read it in bits and pieces. They read it out of context. They go to the verses that they like. They ignore the ones that they don't. It's a lot of cherry picking, you know? Yeah. And so if I'm going to be as generous as possible, he probably just doesn't know. Assuming he read the Bible at all. He may have just gone to apologetics websites and, you know, why is slavery wrong according to the Chat GPT? Why is slavery wrong according to the Bible? It's going to tell you what you want to hear, and it's going to point you to the verses that help your argument, and especially if you don't challenge it or push back, right? He could be doing that. I'm going to give him a little bit more grace and say he's probably read those verses, but again, doesn't know the entire context. Certainly hasn't read the whole Bible, at least not the whole book of Exodus or Leviticus, because these conclusions that he's drawing are inconsistent with the bulk of academic scholarship on these issues.
No problem. So we are unfortunately at time. How much did we get through? 29 minutes. Oh man. So
that's fine. We can do it in 3 parts if necessary. I have an hour and 30. I was
going to ask, like, how do you feel about 3 parts of this?
Yeah, if you have to go, that's fine. I can probably do another 30 minutes, but if I didn't know if you need to go, that's fine. So, yeah, I'm happy to come back. Huh?
Yeah, let's, if you don't mind, let's do a third time. Because for those that don't know, we're doing part 2 next week. So we could pick another date for part 3 if you're cool with that.
Yeah. The conversation kind of deviated off into slavery. It's supposed to be a morality argument, but somebody brought up slavery, and then that's its own debate. That's the other thing with these debates. I don't like mixing debates. You know, but like if we're going to talk about slavery, let's make that a dedicated debate, because that'll go on for over an hour by itself, right? Can you be good without God, or the morality debate? That's a separate debate. And also that's not connected to whether God exists. The first debate you guys probably should have had is there a good reason to believe that a God exists? Yeah,
that would have been a better one.
Now you don't have to do it in that order. You could do that later, you know, but I'm kind of glad, frankly, to be honest, that it didn't go that direction, because then we would have just gotten a bunch of side timber and Kate lines that devolve into circularity, you know. And so I'm kind of glad that it was more of a morality based debate, because then there's some things of substance that you can talk. He couldn't do a lot of his presup things that you would normally do with a presup in a does God exist type of debate, you know. He did some of it, but most of it was just mischaracterizing what your position is. That's not what agnostic means. You know, your position on morality is arbitrary. Well, it says you didn't say any of that, but that's what his script needs it to be in order to work. You know, if you define I'm agnostic, I don't know whether God exists or not. Then that's what it means. For the purposes of that conversation, that's what agnostic means. It doesn't matter what the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says. You've already defined it. That's your usage of it. Morality is well-being. Okay. It doesn't matter what you think it is outside of that. You know, it can be arbitrary, it cannot be arbitrary. The definition is well-being. We've already agreed to that, you know. So when he says, well, your definition of morality is just, it's my preference. You didn't say that. You said well-being. So, you know, so it's to make sure you just define all your terms. Don't let them change your definitions to fit their narrative. You know, remember, they're going off of a script.
Yeah,
he may not have been, and when I say that, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I don't know that he was actually had a script literal in front of him, but there is an apologetics playbook, is what I mean.
Yeah,
and they're all kind of all the arguments.
Playbook too.
Pardon?
There's a presup playbook too.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I meant to say. That's the presuppositional apologetics. There's a playbook for that.
Right.
Apologetics takes many different forms. There's not necessarily a standard playbook, but the presup one, it's always a script. You know, it's always these set of talking points. Morality has to be this. Agnostic has to mean this. Atheism has to mean that. You know, and morality has to be consistent with God's nature, which is begging the question, right? Because that's the thing you have to demonstrate. That's why a lot of people would say, well, you should start with, do we have a good reason to believe in God? Because of if there is no God, his definition of, then there is no morality according to his definition, right?
That's true.
If you ground morality in God and there isn't a God, then according to the theist, there's no such thing as morality. there would be no such thing as morality. So
Oh,
anyway,
there's
I'm looking
so
at
many
some of the
things
comments and I see a bunch of shout outs. So let me just like shout out a couple people.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just been talking back and forth with theoretically, but there's a couple other.
We need, theoretically said we need weekly Bryce streams. You know what? I'm okay with that. I really am.
Yeah, this sounds weird, but after so much time of being away for various reasons, not always in my control, I am much more comfortable being on other people's streams as a guest than having to host original topics that I have to come up with and arrange guests. And I mean, if I was being paid for that, I would be more comfortable with it. But the fact that I'm not, it is a kind of a stressful thing. I retired early, young. Somebody made a comment about my age, I think, in the comments too earlier. I retired from the military. I did a full, I served for 21 years, but then I retired and I never went back to work. And I'm okay with that. Like, I realized it took me a while to get to the point where I could say that out loud, but I'm okay with that. As long as I can financially be okay with it, I don't know that I want to go back to work because I'm living in a stress-free, for the most part, situation right now. And so that's the secret to not aging. I mean, it's gonna it is happening. It is happening. It's gonna happen. I can feel it. The looks are deceiving, and it's gonna catch up. But I'm gonna milk it for as long as possible. And part of that is not having the stress of working. I also don't have kids, so that's the other thing.
Yeah, kids will stress you out. Those will age real quick.
Yeah, I kind of don't want to say what my age is because I feel like once I do, then people are gonna see that. But
I've never said my age on any stream, despite
there
being
you
asked
go.
multiple times.
Yeah,
it's a closely guarded secret.
Yeah, so I will occasionally I'll learn some like Gen Z slang so that I can pretend to be not Gen Z, but at least a young millennial.
Yes, I learned all the new stuff from my nephew, all the new lingo.
And I hate it, by the way. I hate it. But anyway, thanks for all the shout outs for people like asking about me. I hope I didn't ramble on too long, but then that's probably why you brought me on. So
I wanted you to help me just completely break this down. So yeah, no, don't apologize for rambling. I'm glad. Talk away.
Yeah.
So
was there anything else you wanted to say about the stream or any points that you wanted to ask me about before getting rid of it?
No, I'm good right now. We'll continue pick up next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Don't disconnect yet. But Bryce, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you doing this. Sorry, I can't pay you. I'm not making any money.
No, I don't. I would do this for free all the
time. Thank you for my to all my patrons, especially Cindy PLAZA. You rock. And I hope everyone has a good night. See you later.